Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. Sometimes I feel like perfect relationships are more of a myth, but that's exactly how I felt when I thought about my marriage to Tom. We were the couple people admired. He was successful, caring, and attentive. I was the supportive, loving wife. Our friends always joked that we were the perfect match. Maybe I truly believed it, until Jack appeared on the horizon. Tom decided to throw a party for his colleagues and friends. His friend Jack, who had recently gone through a divorce, was invited, and it was his first social outing since the breakup. Tom and I had talked about how we could support Jack, knowing that he was having a tough time dealing with the divorce. I remember the moment I first saw Jack. He was standing by the bar, his brows slightly furrowed, trying to seem casual, but there was still a shadow of loneliness in his eyes. His dark hair and light stubble gave him a rugged look, but it was appealing. I approached him, smiled to ease his tension a bit, and offered him a glass of wine. "How are you holding up?" I asked, trying to start with something neutral. "Better than expected, but worse than I'd like," he replied, with a hint of bitterness in his voice. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about various things: life after divorce, how much it changes a person, how Jack was coping. It seemed like his honesty was revealing an unseen part of his soul to me. Tom was busy with the guests, and Jack and I talked endlessly. The more I listened to him, the more I noticed that with each passing minute, our conversation was becoming something more than just a chat between two friends. At one point, he told me how he had taken up sports after the divorce to distract himself from his thoughts. Jack was clearly passionate about what he was saying, and I found myself unable to take my eyes off him. His confidence, strength, and determination awakened an interest in me that I neither could nor wanted to analyze. For some reason, it was too easy for me to be around him. "You know, Tom was really worried about you." I tried to shift the conversation to get away from my thoughts. "Tom always worries. He's a great friend. But I'll manage." Jack met my gaze, and in that moment, I felt that something more than just a friendly conversation had arisen between us. Of course, Tom didn't notice anything unusual. He continued laughing with his colleagues, completely immersed in the festive atmosphere. But I had the feeling that an invisible, yet palpable barrier had appeared in our home that evening. I tried to hide my confusion and focus on something else, but every movement Jack made, every glance, kept pulling me back to him. Jack spoke as if we were old friends. His manner of communication, the ease, and yet the underlying sense of inner turmoil made me feel his presence even more acutely. I felt like I understood his pain, his loneliness. I didn't even know why this was so important to me, but by the end of the evening, I couldn't get him out of my head. When Tom called me to help with the refreshments, I realized that my thoughts kept returning to Jack. His voice, his gaze, all of it was now inside me, leaving a mark. And even when the guests began to leave, and Tom was telling me about plans for the upcoming weekend, I suddenly realized that I wasn't thinking about any of it. Later, when the guests had left and it was just Tom and me, I felt a strange emptiness. I should have been fully present with him, my husband, whom I loved and respected. But instead, my thoughts were far away, drifting back to Jack. This new, unfamiliar aspect of my life was both unsettling and intriguing. What was this? Why had I suddenly started paying so much attention to Jack, a man I barely knew before that evening? And why had this attraction, barely noticeable at first, suddenly become so real to me? That night, as I lay in bed next to Tom, listening to his steady breathing, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jack, about how he was handling his pain, and how our conversations had so easily flowed into something more than just casual talk. It was too early to call it an attraction, but without a doubt, something was beginning to happen. The next day brought with it the usual routine. Tom left for work, and I tried to get back to my normal activities. But every little thing in the apartment, every sound, brought back memories of the previous night. I started to realize that this situation wasn't going to go away easily. Jack had left a mark on my thoughts, and despite all my efforts, this felt like the beginning of something more, and maybe something dangerous. A few days had passed since that party, and no matter how hard I tried to return to my usual life, thoughts of Jack kept resurfacing in my mind. It was a strange feeling, as if he had left a mark that couldn't be erased. I convinced myself it was just a mild interest sparked by his recent divorce. But with each passing day, that feeling grew stronger. One morning, after Tom had left for work, I decided to go for a walk. The day was warm, and I wanted to take a break from the routine. Soon, I heard the sound of an incoming message on my phone. It was from Jack. "Hey, Sophie, I think I didn't get the chance to thank you properly for your support at the party. It was nice talking to you. How are you?" His message was simple, but there was something personal in it, something that made me smile. I paused for a moment before replying. There was a sense of closeness in Jack's message, as if our conversations had already moved to a new level. As soon as I started typing my reply, a light excitement stirred within me. "Hey Jack, everything's great, thank you. How about you? I hope your weekend went smoothly," I replied, trying not to give too much weight to the conversation. From that day on, our exchanges became regular. We shared everyday events and then started discussing deeper topics. Jack talked about his divorce, how hard it was to live alone, his fears and doubts. Unexpectedly for myself, I began to share with him what was inside me, the doubts that sometimes arose even in my seemingly perfect marriage with Tom. One evening, when Tom was working late, Jack suggested we meet for coffee. I felt a little awkward accepting the invitation, but I convinced myself it was just a friendly meeting. After all, there was nothing wrong with that, right? We met at a cozy cafe in the city center. Jack was sitting by the window, and when he noticed me, he smiled broadly. I walked over to him, and when our eyes met, I felt that strange pull again. We ordered coffee, and the conversation flowed naturally. It was unexpectedly easy and comfortable. We talked about everything, from movies to childhood memories. "Sophie, are you always this cheerful?" he asked when I was laughing, telling him a story from my childhood. "Well, not always," I replied, suddenly feeling that our conversation had taken a more personal turn. Jack looked at me intently, and I felt something more developing between us. His gaze was penetrating and seemed so sincere that I couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. "Tom's a lucky guy," he said, with a slight hint of envy in his voice. "You have this light energy about you. Being around you makes one feel alive." Those words made my heart skip a beat for a moment. I felt something inside me respond to his compliment. He looked at me in a way Tom hadn't in a long time, as if I were the center of his attention, his desire. We continued meeting from time to time, and with each meeting, our conversations grew more personal, more intimate. Jack talked about his plans for the future, how he wanted to start fresh. His confidence and determination impressed me, and I found myself enjoying being around him. He was so attentive, so caring. I felt comfortable and desired in his company, and that feeling, which I hadn't experienced for a long time, captivated me. One morning, after returning home from meeting Jack, I realized I was thinking more about him than Tom. A wave of guilt washed over me, but it quickly faded against the joy I felt from the time I had spent with him. Everything in my life was so right with Tom, but with Jack, I felt something entirely different, something new, dangerous, and enticing. Our friendship was becoming more than just a casual interaction. I couldn't explain why, but his attention toward me made me feel special. I relished this new feeling, even though it was unsettling. It seemed like Jack was becoming more attached to me, and I was diving deeper into this whirlwind of emotions. One day, when Tom was at work, Jack texted me again. This time, he suggested we meet at a lake just outside the city. The place was known for its tranquility and beauty. I hesitated for a long time, but eventually I agreed. Unexpectedly, I found myself allowing Jack to take up more space in my life. We met by the lake, and the day was filled with calm. Jack once again spoke about his struggles, about how he was coping with life after the divorce. But this time, he was closer. We sat side by side, and I felt his hand occasionally brush against mine, sending a light thrill through me. "You know, I look forward to every one of our meetings, Sophie," Jack said, his voice carrying unexpected sincerity. "I enjoy them too," I replied, though everything inside me wasn't that simple. I looked at the water, trying to sort through my feelings. This was more than just friendship. I felt the pull between us growing stronger. Jack was someone who saw something in me, something I might have stopped seeing in myself long ago. He made me feel alive. When I returned home, I realized something had changed. Outwardly, nothing had shifted between Tom and me, but inside, A new world had already started to form. A world in which Jack was taking up more and more space. And I didn't know where it would lead. But I was sure of one thing. This was the beginning of something inevitable. I knew I was playing with fire. With each passing day, my meetings with Jack became more frequent, and it felt as though an invisible thread was slowly pulling us closer and closer together. I understood that this couldn't go on, but I was no longer able to stop. Jack was the one who had reignited a sense of life in me that had long faded. Every glance, every word from him gradually tore down the wall that stood between me and reality. That day, Jack and I accidentally ended up in the same place. I had stopped by a cafe for a cup of coffee after a walk, and there he was, sitting by the window. He looked up, saw me, and smiled. "Hey, Sophie." His voice was as warm as ever, and I couldn't help but smile back. "Hi, Jack," I replied, feeling that familiar spark ignite within me again. We sat down, and the conversation flowed as easily as it always did. It felt as if everything around us faded away, leaving just the two of us, alone in our world. We talked about our lives, about what had been happening to us lately. But this time, the conversation became more personal, more intimate. "You know, Sophie," Jack said suddenly, lowering his eyes, "sometimes I wonder how things would have turned out if my life had gone differently. Maybe I wouldn't have made so many mistakes. Maybe everything would be different." "Everyone makes mistakes, Jack," I replied, feeling that our conversation was entering dangerous territory. "We can't change the past." He looked at me, and I noticed something new in his eyes. His gaze wasn't just attentive. There was that same tension I had been feeling between us for a long time. "But we can change the present," he said softly, and his words hung in the air, filling the space with an inexplicable silence. I couldn't respond. All I could do was look at him, feeling something irreversible building between us. I knew I should stop, I should leave, but my body no longer obeyed me. "Do you want to change the present?" I asked, not realizing that I had already crossed the point of no return. Jack reached for my hand, and when his fingers brushed against my skin, I felt an electric jolt shoot through my body. It was so simple, yet so significant. His touch seemed to shatter all the walls I had spent so long building around myself. "I don't know what this is, Sophie," he said, his voice quieter now, "but I can't ignore it anymore." His words pierced right through me. I knew that this moment would change everything. Our mutual attraction had become too obvious to deny. I tried to muster the strength to stop, to say something that would bring us back to safe ground, but instead, all I wanted was to be close to him. We sat so close that I could hear his breathing. His face was just inches from mine, and I felt the air between us grow heavier with tension. In that moment, everything else ceased to exist. It was just us, Jack and me, sitting in this small cafe, lost in our own universe. And before I realized what was happening, he leaned in and kissed me. It was a soft but insistent kiss. His lips touched mine so gently that it took my breath away. I felt my heart race, and a wave of warmth spread through my body. In that moment, nothing else mattered. It was just us, just this kiss. I kissed him back, feeling something inside me break. It was too easy, too right, even though I knew it shouldn't be. I was aware that this was a step into the abyss, but I couldn't stop. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt his warmth, his strength. I lost myself in the moment, allowing myself to forget everything that was happening around us. When we finally pulled away from each other, I knew there was no going back. We had crossed the line we weren't supposed to. I looked at him, searching for words, but all I could do was breathe heavily, feeling reality slowly start to return. "Sophie," Jack whispered, and there was the same confusion in his voice that I felt within myself. "I can't keep hiding this anymore." I didn't know what to say. That kiss had changed everything. It was the natural culmination of the feelings that had been growing between us for a long time. And now that it had happened, I understood that we could no longer pretend to be just friends. I lowered my eyes, trying to collect myself. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong, that I had betrayed Tom. But at the same time, I couldn't deny what I felt. There was something special about Jack, something I hadn't felt in years. "I need to go," I said quietly, finally finding the strength to stand up. Jack didn't try to stop me. He simply nodded, understanding that this moment was as pivotal for him as it was for me. We could no longer pretend that nothing was happening. I left the cafe, feeling as if the world around me had changed. That kiss, so simple and natural, had opened the door to a world where rules and boundaries no longer mattered. And now that the door was open, I knew that it was impossible to go back. It all started with that kiss in the cafe. Back then, I thought I could stop, that I could just forget what had happened and return to my usual life with Tom. But the more I tried to do that, the more I felt reality slipping away, and all that remained was Jack and the feelings I could no longer ignore. Our meetings became more frequent, but now they had taken on a new character. We met in secluded places, somewhere no one could see us. These moments were filled with passion, and every time we were alone, I felt the energy between us, pulsing, ready to tear us apart from within. We started meeting in the evenings when Tom was at work or away on business. Jack always found a place where we could be alone. Sometimes it was small cafes in remote areas where no one knew us, sometimes parks or even secluded spots outside the city. These meetings filled me with an unknown energy. I felt alive, as if for the first time in a long while. Every time I was near Jack, it was as if I forgot about everything else in the world. Time with him felt like a dream. Reality ceased to exist, and it was just the two of us. We talked, laughed, and with each new meeting, I realized that I was sinking deeper into this abyss. At times, I felt it was wrong, that it was a betrayal of Tom, but my feelings for Jack were stronger than everything else. One evening, when Tom was once again away on a business trip, Jack suggested we go out of town. He knew of a small cozy cabin by a lake where we could spend time away from prying eyes. I agreed, though inside, a storm was raging. I knew this was another step into the unknown, but it seemed to me that without taking it, I wouldn't be able to breathe anymore. The cabin turned out to be the perfect place for seclusion. Small, cozy, with large windows overlooking the lake, it seemed made for us to forget everything. Jack and I arrived there late in the evening. When we walked inside, I felt the atmosphere of the room enveloping us. Everything around seemed to whisper of passion, of the inevitability of what was to come. We sat on the couch by the window, looking out at the water, and I felt Jack inching closer to me. His hand slowly slid across mine, and I felt that familiar spark, the one that pierced through me every time he touched me. "You know I can't be without you anymore," he whispered softly, his voice low and hoarse. I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw the same thing I was feeling. We were bound by something that could no longer be broken. My hand reached up to his face, and at that moment, I realized that everything happening between us was inevitable. Our lips met again, but this kiss was different. It was insistent, demanding. I felt the desire growing in every cell of my body. Everything that was happening felt both so right and so wrong at the same time. I knew this was a step over the line, but I couldn't stop. We kissed as if the world around us had ceased to exist. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt him pulling me closer, leaving no chance for resistance. It was more than just passion. In that moment, I was ready to give everything I had just to stay in his arms. The night passed in a haze. We spent it together, and every moment was filled with that pure passion I hadn't felt in a long time. With him, I was different, free, unburdened by obligations or fears. But when morning came, reality began to catch up with me once again. I woke up in his arms, feeling his breath on my skin. Jack was still asleep, and I watched him, realizing that my life would never be the same again. I knew I had betrayed Tom, knew that our relationship could never be the same. But in that moment, I couldn't feel guilt. All I felt was that I was finally alive. Jack woke up and looked at me, and I saw the same realization in his eyes. We didn't talk about what had happened, but there was no need for words. Everything between us had already become reality, and we both understood that. When I returned home, the guilt began to slowly seep into my consciousness. Tom, as always, was kind and caring, unaware of anything. I tried to hide my confusion, but inside, a storm was brewing. I couldn't understand how I had come this far, yet at the same time, I couldn't stop. Jack had become something more to me than just a friend. He was that part of me that I had long lost. Our meetings continued. we found more and more ways to see each other, to spend time together. Every time I was near Jack, my feelings for him grew stronger. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop anymore. This affair was like a flame that was burning me from the inside, yet at the same time, I couldn't imagine life without it. With each passing day, our bond grew deeper. We sought any opportunity to be together. And though I tried to hide our relationship from Tom, I knew it couldn't go on like this forever. Inside, the tension was building, ready to explode sooner or later. But for now, Jack and I were enjoying every moment. We lived in this strange bubble where nothing existed but our feelings and desires. And even though I knew that sooner or later it would lead to destruction, I couldn't stop. Every morning, I woke up with conflicting emotions. Inside me, a storm raged. With love for Tom, our past, and the life we had built together on one side, and on the other, this unstoppable attraction to Jack, which I could not control. Every day, this inner conflict tore me apart more and more. Tom was still the same man I fell in love with. He was caring, attentive, and when I looked at him, it made everything harder. I could see how he continued to trust me, how he genuinely believed in our marriage, and it caused me pain. Yet, despite the guilt, I couldn't get Jack out of my head. I noticed that Tom started staying at work later. He believed that our relationship was strong, and so it seemed he didn't notice that something had changed. His trust in me only heightened my guilt. I felt like I was betraying him in every moment I was with Jack. And yet, I couldn't stop. Jack was beginning to feel the pressure too. During one of our meetings, I noticed he had become more withdrawn. We were sitting in a cafe, and he seemed to avoid my gaze. Normally, our conversations flowed easily, but this time, a tense silence hung between us. "Do you feel like we've gone too far?" I asked, sensing the growing tension. He nodded slowly, without looking at me. "Sophie, I can't stop thinking about Tom," he finally said softly, meeting my eyes. "He's my friend, and every time I see him, I'm torn apart by guilt. I can't keep pretending everything is fine." His words echoed in my soul. I understood that Jack was struggling with this too, that it was just as difficult for him as it was for me. But despite our shared doubts, the pull between us was still too strong. "I know," I whispered, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "But what can we do? We've already come so far." Jack took my hand and squeezed it. His touch was warm, but this time it didn't bring the comfort it once had. I could see that the same conflict raging inside me was tearing him apart too. He understood that our actions could destroy the lives of the people we loved, but he couldn't stop being with me. "I can't lose you, Sophie." His voice was filled with pain. "But I can't keep living with this feeling either. I'm being torn apart." I felt my heart clench at his words. This affair, which had begun as something exciting and thrilling, had now become something else. It was a heavy burden we both carried on our shoulders. I couldn't stop because my feelings for Jack were too strong, but continuing like this was unbearable. In the evenings, when I came home, the guilt became more and more unbearable. I looked at Tom, who suspected nothing, and each time I was struck by the thought that I might destroy our marriage. I tried to imagine how he would react if he found out the truth. His look, filled with pain and disappointment, seemed inevitable. "Sophie, are you okay?" Tom asked one evening during dinner, noticing my silence. I flinched, as if pulled out of my thoughts, and forced a smile. "Yes, of course, just a bit tired," I lied, avoiding his gaze. He smiled and returned to his meal, unaware of the turmoil in my soul. I could feel the distance between us growing, and that distance was created by my own hands. Each meeting with Jack was filled with passion, but now it was mixed with the bitterness of realizing what we were doing. Our kisses became more tense, our touches more desperate. We both knew that what we had couldn't last forever, but every time I tried to end it, I couldn't. I kept trying to convince myself that I could handle it, that I could control my feelings, but with each passing day, it became harder. Inside me, the conflict raged. I loved Tom, but what I felt for Jack was something entirely different. With him, I felt free, alive. But at what cost? One evening, after another meeting with Jack, I came home to find Tom sitting on the couch, a sad expression on his face. "I've noticed you've been away a lot lately," he said as I entered the room. "Are we okay?" My heart stopped. I hadn't expected this question, but I knew it had to come sooner or later. Tom wasn't stupid, and his intuition told him that something was going on. I looked at him and saw that he was waiting for an answer. My throat tightened, and it became difficult to breathe. "Everything's fine, Tom." I lied again, feeling my guilt grow. "It's just been a lot of work and stress. You know how it is." He nodded, but I could see the doubts still lingering in his eyes. This conversation made me realize that my actions were beginning to affect our marriage. I started to understand that what was happening between Jack and me could destroy everything Tom and I had. But even knowing this, I couldn't find the strength to end our affair. Jack continued to struggle with his choice. We talked about Tom, about how our relationship could ruin their friendship. I could see how much it bothered him, but like me, he couldn't stop. Our feelings were too strong to just disappear. I knew that sooner or later, all of this would explode. Our attraction, our passion, our desire for each other, it couldn't stay hidden forever. Tom's suspicions started to surface gradually. At first, they were small, seemingly insignificant moments. My late returns from work, my changed behavior, the rare fleeting glances he caught when I couldn't hide my true feelings in time. But it was precisely these small things that became the first signals that made him think. I noticed that Tom began asking more questions. "Where have you been? Why are you home so late?" And the most painful, "Are you happy with us?" Each of his questions pierced my consciousness, stirring up feelings of unease. Yet, I still tried to convince myself that I could keep everything a secret, that my affair with Jack would remain unnoticed by those around me. One evening, when I returned home after meeting Jack, I sensed something strange in the air. Tom was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, and his face was tense. He looked at me as though he was waiting for explanations I couldn't give. "Sophie, we need to talk." His voice was firm, lacking the usual softness that accompanied our conversations. My heart pounded, and I felt panic rising inside me. I knew this was the moment of truth, but I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. "I found something," he continued, his words hanging in the air. "You forgot to turn off your phone, and I saw a few messages from Jack." My world collapsed. I stared at Tom, not believing what I was hearing. He knew. He had seen the messages, and now everything Jack and I had tried to hide was out in the open. "Tom, I can explain," I began, but the words got stuck in my throat. "Explain?" His voice rose an octave, and I saw his eyes fill with pain. "Explain how you betrayed me with my best friend?" Those words hit me like a knife to the heart. Tom stood up, unable to sit any longer, and began pacing the room. I could see him struggling with himself, trying to understand how this could have happened. His face was contorted with anger and disappointment. "I trusted you, Sophie. I trusted Jack. How could you both do this to me?" I didn't know what to say. Any words I could muster felt empty and meaningless. I stood before him, feeling shattered, my mind racing with thoughts of how things had come to this. "How long has this been going on?" Tom asked, his voice quieter but no less painful. "A few months," I whispered, unable to meet his eyes. The silence that followed was deafening. Tom said nothing, and all I could hear was my own breathing and the echo of my heart pounding in my chest. "I can't believe this," he finally said. "I always thought we were happy." Those words made my heart constrict. In that moment, I realized that my actions had not only destroyed our marriage, but also the life we had built together. I had betrayed his trust, betrayed our relationship. "What now?" Tom asked, and I realized that this question was addressed not only to me, but to himself as well. I stood at a crossroads, and my entire life hung in the balance. I looked at Tom and saw before me the man I had once loved, the man with whom I had shared all my joys and sorrows. But on the other hand, there was Jack, the one who had brought me back to life, the one I couldn't get out of my head. I knew that any decision I made would lead to pain. If I stayed with Tom, I would betray my feelings for Jack. But if I chose Jack, I would destroy not only my marriage, but also the friendship between Tom and Jack. At that moment, I realized that the choice I had to make was inevitable. I had to make a decision, and that decision would shape my future. "I can't live like this anymore," I said quietly, mustering all the strength I had to say those words. "I'm confused, but I never wanted to hurt you." Tom looked at me, bitterness in his eyes. You already have, Sophie. You've hurt both me and Jack. Whatever you decide now, everything has already changed. I knew he was right. No matter what my choice would be, the damage had already been done. Our marriage would never be the same again, nor would the relationship between Tom and Jack. Everything had fallen apart. When I went to Jack and told him what had happened, his face turned pale, and he was silent for a long time, trying to process what he had heard. Tom knows, I said, feeling the weight of my guilt grow even heavier. Jack shook his head, his face full of regret. It wasn't supposed to end like this, he said quietly, but now we have to decide what to do next. That moment became a turning point for both of us. We realized that we could no longer hide our feelings, but continuing as we had was impossible. I stood on the edge of a decision, either try to save my marriage or continue my relationship with Jack. But in any case, I knew the consequences of this choice would be irreversible. Tom gave me time to think. He didn't leave the house, but the atmosphere between us became tense and cold. I could feel his disappointment and pain, and it tore me apart from the inside. Yet, despite all of this, my feelings for Jack hadn't disappeared. I stood before a choice that would change my entire life. And perhaps it was the hardest decision I had ever had to make. After the truth came out, our life with Tom was never the same. The silence between us grew louder than any words. Every day, we tried to talk, to discuss, to figure out how to move forward. But no matter what we did, the shadow of betrayal loomed over us. Tom tried to hold on. He wanted to save our marriage, and I could see him fighting with himself, trying not to remember everything that had happened. But there was always something new in his eyes. Distrust, pain, disappointment. Jack disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared in my life. He called me a few days after that conversation with Tom, and his voice sounded as if he had already made up his mind. "Sophie," he said heavily, "I think we should stop. I can't keep doing this, not to myself, not to Tom. I'm leaving to give you both a chance to fix things." I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling my heart clench at his words. It was exactly what I had feared hearing, but at the same time, it was exactly what needed to be done. Jack was right. His presence only worsened the problems between Tom and me. "Jack," I said quietly, not knowing what else to add. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just try to save your marriage if you can." His words felt like the final reminder that our story had come to an end. I couldn't hold on to him, and deep down, I knew it was the right thing. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself of this, my feelings for him didn't disappear. After that conversation, the emptiness inside me only grew stronger. Jack was gone, but his mark remained. I knew his decision was the right one, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. Even when I was next to Tom, my thoughts kept drifting back to Jack. It was like a wound that wouldn't heal. Tom, with his characteristic determination, suggested we try to repair our relationship. We started seeing a family therapist, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. I saw how much Tom sincerely wanted to restore things, how he tried to regain the trust that had been broken. I was trying too. I understood it was my duty to save our marriage. We had been through too much to let it all fall apart. Each therapy session was a challenge for us. We talked about what had happened, about our feelings, about how to rebuild trust. But the more we talked, the clearer it became to me that our marriage was no longer what it used to be. There was a constant barrier between us, unseen but palpable. We tried to get closer, but it felt like we were trying to reclaim something long lost. Tom was patient. He didn't blame me outright, but his eyes spoke more than words. I saw how he was suffering, how he was trying to forget and forgive. But trust is fragile, and despite all our efforts, it had been shattered beyond repair. We tried to bring back the passion we had lost. Tom arranged romantic dinners. We took weekend trips to spend time together. But it all felt superficial. Every time he hugged me or kissed me, I couldn't shake the thoughts of Jack. It was like a ghost that wouldn't let go. One evening, as we sat down for dinner at home, Tom looked at me with a serious expression. "Sophie, do you still think about him?" he asked directly, catching me off guard. I couldn't lie to him. There had been too many lies between us in the past months. "Yes," I quietly answered, unable to meet his gaze. "I can't forget." Tom nodded, and I saw his face contort with pain. "I knew this wouldn't be easy," he said, "but I hoped that with time, you'd be able to let him go." I lowered my eyes, feeling the tears welling up. "I wanted that too, Tom," I whispered, "but I can't. Not yet." Tom sighed heavily and looked away. We both understood that, despite our efforts, nothing would ever be the same. Our marriage, no matter how hard we tried, remained overshadowed by my affair with Jack. With each passing day, I realized more and more that even if I tried to hold on to our marriage, my feelings for Jack would always haunt me. Tom and I tried to create a facade of normalcy, but inside, I felt like it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed for good. The trust that was lost could never be regained, and although Tom didn't say it out loud, I saw it in his eyes. We both felt like strangers, trying to save something that was already broken. After long conversations, sleepless nights, and countless tears, Tom and I made the decision to start over. This decision was not easy, and the path to it was filled with pain, disappointment, and the realization that our relationship would never be the same again. But despite this, we both understood that we wanted to try. We moved into a new house, hoping it would help us leave the past behind and start a new chapter in our lives. The new house was smaller, cozier, and far from the places where the events that changed our lives had taken place. Tom suggested this move as a symbolic gesture to start fresh. I agreed, hoping that the change of scenery would help me find inner peace. The first few weeks in the new house were difficult. There was a certain caution in the air, as if we were afraid to take a wrong step, say the wrong thing, or stir up memories that were better left in the past. We tried not to talk about Jack, not to mention the moments that had destroyed our marriage. Instead, we focused on what still connected us: shared interests, memories of happier times, and our desire to make things right. We began spending more time together, trying to rebuild the bonds that had been lost. Tom suggested we take up a new hobby: bike rides along scenic routes we hadn't explored yet. These trips became a way for us to reconnect, enjoy nature and each other, without being distracted by our problems. But even with all our efforts, the shadow of the past continued to linger over us. There were moments when our eyes would meet, and I could see in his the pain that refused to fade. It was always there, like an invisible observer, reminding us of everything we had been through. Tom started going to therapy on his own to deal with his feelings. I too continued working on myself, trying to find a way to forgive myself for what I had done. We knew that rebuilding trust would take a long time, and that it might never fully return. But we both agreed that we wanted to at least try. There were moments of sincerity and warmth between us again, when we laughed together or shared our thoughts. These moments gave me hope that we could build something new, even if it wasn't the same as before. We worked on restoring mutual respect, trying to be honest with each other, even when it hurt. One of the hardest aspects of this new beginning was acknowledging that our lives would never be the same. I realized that my actions had affected not just me and Tom, but Jack as well, and all of our relationships. These events had left an indelible mark on our lives, and that mark would always be with us. I understood that Tom and I had a chance to create something new, but it wouldn't be what we had before. We had both changed. We were more cautious, perhaps even more closed off. But at the same time, we had grown stronger, having weathered this storm. Each day was a fight for trust, for respect, for the chance to move forward together. We made a decision not to talk about the past anymore, about Jack, or the mistakes that had brought us to this point. Instead, we focused on what united us and what we could build anew. One day, during another bike ride, Tom stopped on a hill overlooking the sunset. He looked at me, and I saw not only the pain that had haunted us for all these months, but also something new: hope. "Sophie, I can't promise that things will ever be like they were before," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I'm willing to try. We can build something new if we work on it together." I nodded, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "I am too, Tom," I replied, squeezing his hand. "I'm ready to try too." Our relationship would never be the same. We both knew that. But in this new beginning, despite all the difficulties, I saw a chance for something different. It might not be a perfect marriage, but it would be our marriage, the one we chose to save despite all the obstacles. And although the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew one thing. Now, I was ready to work for it, without looking back. In the end, our future was in our hands, and this was the new start we both deserved. Several months have passed since Tom and I decided to give our marriage a second chance. This journey turned out to be far more challenging than we could have imagined. Each attempt to rebuild our relationship felt like walking on thin ice. But with each passing day, that ice grew stronger. Our relationship had changed. It was no longer like the early years of our marriage, when everything seemed perfect. Now we knew each other better, deeper, and that knowledge wasn't always pleasant. We saw not only the bright sides of each other, but also the shadows that had once been hidden behind the facade of everyday life. Yet, despite all these difficulties, we learned to forgive one another. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It didn't come right away, and along the way, there were moments when I doubted we could manage it. But over time, I realized that forgiveness is not just a single moment when everything becomes okay again. It is an ongoing process, a daily choice to move forward, despite the pain and disappointment. Every time I thought of Jack, I felt a slight pang in my heart. His image remained with me, a reminder of the decisions that had changed my life. But over time, that memory stopped being a source of pain. It became more of a lesson, a reminder of how fragile human relationships can be, how easily they can be destroyed, and how difficult it is to rebuild them afterward. Jack was left in the past, as were the feelings I had for him. He was no longer a part of my life, and I understood that it had to be that way. Tom and I had built something new, not perfect, but ours. We had learned to trust each other again, though that trust was no longer as unconditional as it once was. Now it required effort, work on ourselves and on each other. But this trust, perhaps, had become more real, more mature. One evening, as Tom and I sat on the porch of our new home, watching the setting sun, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. This peace hadn't come easily. It had been earned through effort, pain, and forgiveness. I looked over at Tom, and he, sensing my gaze, turned and smiled. "We made it, didn't we?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with hope. "Yes," I replied, smiling back. "We made it." Our relationship was no longer perfect, and maybe it never would be. But now I understood that perfection was an illusion. Real relationships are built on the willingness to forgive, the ability to listen, and the effort to work on ourselves. We had both changed over this time, but in those changes, I saw not only pain, but also strength. Tom took my hand, and I felt the warmth of his touch. In that moment, I realized that despite all the hardships we had faced, we had found our way. It wasn't the path I had imagined at the beginning of our marriage, but it was real. Jack was in the past, but the lessons I had learned would stay with me forever. Those lessons taught me to appreciate what I have and not take anything for granted. I learned that the decisions we make can change not only our lives, but also the lives of those around us. And though sometimes those decisions might be wrong, they are still a part of our journey. Now I could look ahead with confidence. Our future was uncertain, but I knew one thing. Together, Tom and I could handle any challenges that came our way. We had found a new path, and though it wasn't easy, it was ours.